Hi, everybody. Peter Greenberg here. As someone who covers travel news regularly, I can tell you from personal experience, it's changing by the day, by the minute, sometimes overnight, sometimes by the hour. It's evolving so quickly. Everything seems to be breaking news. And nowhere is that more prevalent than in the cruise industry. So I'm welcoming back the president and CEO of the Cruise Lines International Association, Kelly Craighead. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for having me back. You were right. At least in the cruise industry, if you missed an hour, you missed a lot. So I'm excited to be able to join you today.
The last time we talked, we were doing an update on where you thought things were going to be, what the cruise lines are doing to be in compliance with the original no sail order of the Centers for Disease Control. That then morphed into a conditional sail order, which we also talked about. And then shortly after our last conversation, it appeared to be that the CDC was essentially lifting everything and allowing cruise lines to sail from and to U.S. ports. But to recap, before we even got there, a number of cruise lines said, we're the only ones that we know who can literally reposition our assets. And they did in many cases to many foreign ports that they would then home port their ships, the Bahamas, Bermuda, St. Martin, Iceland, the UK and Greece, among others. And that was already in the works when the CDC said, well, we think you can now sail from and to US ports. But as we're talking today, in the latter part of May, there are no cruise ships sailing from or to US ports yet, correct?
That's right, Peter. So not yet. What the Cruise Lines International Association has been working on for the last many weeks and months is really the opportunity for cruise ships to sail to and from the United States. Our call to action was to have these ships sailing by this summer, and we are cautiously optimistic we might be on that track.
So we're also, you mentioned the CDC, of course, at the same time, almost on a parallel path, has been their latest guidance about mask wearing, which it seems great. It's also quite confusing because it doesn't deal with whether the public sector has something to do with it anymore or the private sector has a responsibility anymore. What we do know, just based on that guidance, is the CDC saying that if you are a fully vaccinated American, you do not have to wear your mask indoors or outdoors, and except in matters of public transportation, which they define at that point as airports, airlines, buses, trains. They have a separate category for you. And the ironic thing is, and please tell me if I'm wrong, the cruise lines have essentially said, you cannot get on a cruise ship if you're an officer, a crew member, or a passenger, unless you've been vaccinated. So you already have 100% vaccination compliance. And it would seem to me that you would not necessarily need a separate category, but you are still in that category. And that's confusing a lot of passengers as well.
What the cruise industry has committed to do to support sailing from U.S. ports is to essentially operate on two tracks. One track that's dedicated to highly vaccinated cruises. So that's a cruise that has 95% of the crew vaccinated and 95% of its passengers vaccinated. But since we know that children, for example, under 12 are not able to be vaccinated, and many of our cruise ships cater to families, there's also a track for cruising that's open to all, that really supports the ability to cruise at a time like this. And we're comfortable with that. The cruise industry has themselves instituted very robust protocols for health and safety. We have ships that have been sailing successfully since last summer using these protocols long before there were vaccines. And they've proven successful, with any incident rate on a ship being much lower than anything you see on land.
Of course, if I'm to interpret the CDC rules currently, I use the word currently in quotes, if I become a passenger on a cruise ship sailing from a U.S. port, I basically have to wear my mask everywhere.
Peter, one of the things that we are seeking clarification from the CDC is about these passenger protocols and what are the expectations for passengers who are traveling on highly vaccinated cruise ships. So again, cruise ships that have 95% of the crew vaccinated, 95% of the guests vaccinated. So that's an area that we're seeking clarification on right now.
Of course, there's following the science and then there's following politics. Somewhere in between there lies the confusion.
That's right. I mean, I think that what the cruise lines are trying to do is really follow the science. And the science has told us that the protocols that we have in place before vaccines have proven effective. And the addition of vaccines are really a game changer. They are added to these already robust protocols that create an opportunity on a cruise ship to really have one of the experiences as close to getting to herd immunity as you can possibly get. So we look forward to the opportunity that these highly vaccinated cruises will be able to depart from US ports, because we think that's when Americans who are cruising will be as close to back to normal as anything you can find anywhere on the planet.
Well, let's go outside of US ports for a second. We've seen the European Union announce it about a month ago that they were going to go to a direction where fully vaccinated Americans could go to those countries without having to quarantine. They'd still have to be tested in many cases, but they wouldn't have to be quarantined. They could travel freely. We've had an EU announcement this week saying they were clarifying it even more, saying they expected it to happen any minute. We already have Greece opening up. That was May 15th. We had Italy opening up. We have France opening up. We have Spain opening up. And then, of course, there's the issue of the United Kingdom and reciprocity with the United States. My guess is that that'll be resolved before June 15th, only because no country wants to go without another summer of revenue. And we've morphed, in a sense, from a public health issue now to an economic one. And where does the common sense lie if everybody's already complying by the rules? So I guess my question is, you already have ships sailing overseas. You already have US-based ships that are now moved over to some locations like St. Martin. On June 5th, you have the Celebrity ship is going to sail, and then followed by other ships in Bermuda and Bahamas. They're sailing at reduced capacity, but they're sailing fully vaccinated, correct?
That's correct. Many of the ships that you are seeing sailing in the Caribbean are sailing fully vaccinated. However, there are ships that are sailing in Europe that are not traveling fully vaccinated. Clearly, at this point, the vaccines are not widely available. And in those cases, you can see that the very robust protocols that guided the resumption of cruising last summer in Europe are in place again this year. And that includes things like physical distancing and mask wearing. The good news is, if you love to cruise, we know from the people who have been cruising since last summer, even with these robust measures in place, it's still a great way to have a holiday and to have a vacation. It has not been a deterrent in any way.
And looking at the itinerary of the Celebrity Millennium, which is sailing from St. Martin, I believe on June 5th, it's sailing from St. Martin around a number of islands and then back to St. Martin. So it's essentially home ported there. Even though they are fully vaccinated, there are rules in place about what you can and can't do, meaning for shore excursions, you can't go off on your own. You have to go on an organized one by the ship. It has to be escorted by a member of the crew. You have times and places and dates where you can be there and you're not. You're doing testing on the ship so that people will comply with returning US rules of that 72-hour negative COVID-19 test. And you're at about half capacity. So exercising an abundance of caution, things look like they're going to be on schedule, at least for that ship to start cruising.
That's right, Peter. So I do think you're going to see many ships who are sailing with a highly vaccinated crew and highly vaccinated set of passengers that are still employing very robust protocols like testing, lots of testing, and the ability to have the pre-arrangements with local authorities and destinations should there be an incident, and the ability to work with the destination and the shore excursions to have matching protocols. What's exciting about the Caribbean is that many of the nations in the Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South America, have been working together in partnership through the Americas Cruise Tourism Task Force to really develop a robust set of protocols that so far are tracking very closely with the protocols that the cruise lines have adopted. And so you'll be able to see that you're having a predictable experience inside a virtual bubble that has really a high bar set for health and safety.
I've also seen a change in the mindset. I'll use Greece as an example. Greece has opened up. I can go there as a fully vaccinated American traveler without any restrictions. I can get on a cruise ship there if I want to. And yet Greece has also been in lockdown. So it's less a factor of how many people have been vaccinated in Greece as to the number of people they're going to allow to come in who have been fully vaccinated. And that's a change in attitude.
That's right. I just have to go back to the beginning and say that vaccines are a game changer, and the travel and tourism industries have been some of the hardest hit sectors as a result of the economic fallout of COVID. And every locality, every nation is struggling with how to get their arms around the public health condition and to provide for the economic generation that travel and tourism, including cruising, provides. That's why, as an industry, we're proud of the cruise industry leading the way in adopting a very high bar for the protocols that are guiding our resumption, so that we can work with countries like Greece to really be able to demonstrate how you can execute an effective travel and tourism strategy like cruising at a time that we're still, frankly, in a health emergency. And so we look forward to working with all of those countries who are not alone. Everyone is struggling with this, but again, the cruise industry is leading the way in providing an opportunity to both manage public health effectively and create a bridge to economic recovery.
And of course, you can do none of this in a vacuum. You have to deal with the ports as a separate entity, make sure that they're satisfied on all of their protocols. You have to satisfy other governments. You have to satisfy your own industry. And then, of course, moving back to the United States, you have to satisfy states. And you have a situation right now where we've talked about this before. It's part of the continuing conversation about vaccine passports and everything. Oh, that's coming. There's going to be a digital document. You won't be able to go X, Y, or Z, maybe even to the dry cleaners of the grocery store without showing proof of vaccination. We already have one airline saying you can't get a reservation on our flights unless you can show proof of vaccination. You have complete vaccination flights going to Italy on both Delta and United, so that they're allowing those flights to come in, which is how Italy is opening up. And then you have the state of Florida, which is saying you cannot require anybody to be vaccinated to do anything. And of course, that's not sitting well with the cruise lines.
Well, here's where you are exactly right, Peter. The process that cruise lines have to go through is highly dependent on our partners at the ports, at the terminals, in the destinations, with the authorities at all levels. And where we've seen the successful resumption of cruising is where we've seen the successful ability to communicate, to problem solve together. And that's where we've seen real success. When it comes to states like Florida and Texas and Alaska and all of the states in the United States in between, California, South Carolina, too many to name, we just appreciate the support that we've received at all levels, from the State House to their members of Congress to all of their constituents. And so we look forward to working with these states in a productive manner to achieve a shared goal, which is returning 500,000 US workers back to work.
But when you think about this, there's somewhat of an ironic situation here. At the very time that the CDC is working with you to figure out a way forward for US-based cruise lines to sail from US ports and to US ports, you have the governor of the state of Florida saying, you cannot make people have a vaccination in order to get on the ship. And you have one of your cruise line members, Frank Del Rio, saying, well, you know what, if that's what you want to do in the midst of all this, we'll sail out of Florida. We will not stop in Florida. So now the battle lines have been drawn at a time when people think it's all about ready to get better again.
Right. And so here's what's important to remember. There is a shared goal. There is a shared goal in the cruise community that includes elected officials, that includes cruisers, and it includes everybody in between. And that is a focus on getting cruise ships sailing again. And the reason why that's so important, Peter, is that it's not about the cruise ship. It's about the ecosystem that supports the cruise ship. And that's all of the small and medium-sized businesses, not only in these cruise states, but in every state in the United States who somehow touches either through providing products or services or serving as a business partner that are deeply impacted by this suspension. And what we know is that 500,000 Americans that support the cruise industry are ready to go back to work. And we know that we will be able to work through all of the challenges. Right now, we're focused on our work with the CDC and getting the information we need to just have the ability to resume. And that's where our focus is. And that's certainly where the focus of CLIA and our Ready, Set, Sail campaign is.
I'm hearing from so many government officials, privately, of course, that the last thing they want to do is a vaccine passport. They want to leave it to the private sector to make their own rules. Well, you've already made your rules. Qantas in Australia has made their rules. But now we're seeing at the retail level whether it's Target or Costco or Walmart, they're each making different rules as to whether or not people even have to wear masks or not. It's very confusing out there. And how does the private sector lead the way if the private sector hasn't gotten together to figure it out themselves?
Right. Well, I'll tell you that there's nothing more powerful than a public-private partnership. And I certainly hope, given the many challenges the travel and tourism industries are facing around the world, that organizations who are focused on bringing together the public sector and the private sector will continue doing what they are doing, Peter, which is bringing all of the different industry segments together so that we can agree on a common framework for things like interoperability, things like proof of vaccination. So I'm very encouraged that many of my colleagues who are working at the highest levels in other travel and tourism industries, in fact, are having these conversations right now, and that there is a private sector solution, but it will be dependent on our partnership with the public sector. So just like every step of this journey that we've all taken together, I have a high degree of confidence that at least in the travel and tourism sector, we will have a path forward that will make us stronger together.
Well, with the possible exception of the state of Florida, do you envision a situation where, like the old days of the restaurant signs, no shoes, no shirt, no service, it'll include no vaccine, no service?
You know, Peter, it's hard to see that we'll be at a place where cruise ships are saying no vaccines because, again, vaccines are not widely available now, and they're not going to be available to young children. As you know, I have two young children. One is had her first shot. The other one is 10 and won't be eligible for vaccines for quite some time. And so for families like ours, if we are going to encounter a sign that says no vaccines, it's going to be a real challenge. What I know about the cruise industry, it's one of the most accessible travel and tourism experiences you can have. And there's a wide range of products. And we're going to continue to have a wide range of products because families and servicing families is a very important part of the cruise industry.
I remember during the beginning of the pandemic, the big challenges that every cruise line had just to try to get their crew members back to their own home countries. Now you got to get them vaccinated.
That's right. So, you know, again, cruise companies are expert logistic experts. Not only do you have to get the ships back, you have to have the crew back. There remains challenges with international travel, as we've talked about. But again, there is a huge commitment to restart cruising, and these are smart, capable companies. And so I'm not worried about the cruise lines. I am, however, worried about the small and medium-sized businesses that make cruising great and their ability to bring their workforce back and their ability to deliver. And that's, again, why CLIA has invested so greatly all of our focus and energy in trying to resume operations in the United States, because we knew it would take 90 days and everyone needs the kind of predictability. So if we're lucky enough to have successful legislation coming out of the United States Congress this week, and if we're lucky enough to have the kind of clarification from the CDC about the passenger protocols, if we have a magic wand, it still is going to be a number of weeks before any of these ships can sail. And so my hopes and my support are with the small and medium-sized businesses who are going to have to hustle almost twice as much to be able to start receiving cruise visitors. And I'm confident they can do that as well, but it's something we all are mindful of and working to support, especially at CLIA.
So realistically speaking, we're talking probably July 15th at the earliest.
I think that is the earliest possible date based on what I know. And I'm pretty excited about that. You know, Peter, from the very beginning, we have really looked to the administration and President Biden's words that his goal was to get the America back to closer to normal by July. We couldn't imagine a scenario where the world is closer to normal in July and there's no cruising. So we're cautiously optimistic. We still have a long way to go. We're not there yet, but if all the stars align, I do think you'll see it closer to the end of July than the middle of July.
You know, we've talked about Florida, we've talked about Alaska, but there's so many other ports that US-based cruise lines go to, right? We're talking about Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, of course, Los Angeles, San Diego. Yeah, of course, Galveston. When do you resume there? Because, you know, what I'm hearing is they'll start again in Florida. and that may be it for a while until they get up to speed. But what are you hearing from those ports? How fast are they moving to be ready?
Well, I'll tell you, our port partners are amazing, and the cruise ports are, not only are they one of the biggest champions of cruise lines resuming, but they also have set a high bar and are working collaboratively with cruise lines to have matching protocols. And I think all of these ports, like the cruise lines, are going to be able to support resumption this summer. And we are excited about the diversity of the offerings, because what's great about cruising from the United States is there is almost a port within a reasonable driving distance for any American anywhere in the United States. So I am not of the belief that you will only see one market open at a time. This industry is ready for all of the US ports to be able to support this highly controlled return to service this summer.
But of course, until that happens, a lot of people are flying to foreign ports to start their cruise, and the sales figures seem to reflect that.
That's right. So, I think the last time we talked about the fact that cruisers love to cruise, and that I think it's 60% of people who will cruise are willing to get on a plane to fly to another country to board their ship. That was clearly a trend that was moving before we were in a position to actually engage with the Biden administration and the CDC to seek the clarification we need. I think the sooner we have the word, as soon as we can have predictability about operations, you'll see a lot more Americans booking cruises leaving from US ports. And I've seen from a lot of your reporting, Peter, just how enthusiastic travelers are to travel this year. And I can tell you it pales in comparison to the enthusiasm of cruisers who are so desperate to cruise that demand is the only problem we don't have. And in fact, we are already at pre-pandemic demand levels, with many ships being booked many years out, and many people having booked as many as 5 and 6 and 7 cruises. In fact, people in my own family, I can tell you, have already booked 5 cruises that will take place over the next 2 or 3 years. So we're pretty excited about demand.
Well, speaking of demand, we're seeing, for example, in Greece, the bookings there right now are running 12% higher than they were in 2019. Are you seeing a similar response in cruises for those cruises over there?
In Europe, in Australasia, in Asia, in every market, demand is off the charts. And I have to just personally say, what is it? The cobbler's children has no shoes. My family has been so excited to take an Alaskan cruise for so long that I'm concerned if we don't hurry up and book soon, we won't be in a position to be able to take a cruise like that. Because again, not only are we at pre-pandemic levels of demand, but in some cases, like in Greece and other just kind of bucket item areas, we're bettering where we were in 2019.
And one of the things that doesn't get reported often, it's not what people are talking about, it's what they're thinking about. And what they're thinking about is, at least from what I'm hearing, is I don't want to go somewhere and get stuck and not be able to get home. That's the continuing theme that I'm hearing despite the demand. So what are the cruise lines doing to anticipate that, address it, and mitigate that?
That is a terrific question. So mitigate is the right word, Peter. So the cruise lines and the ports and the destinations that cruise lines visit have worked in extraordinary partnership to have in place pre-arranged agreements for what happens. Now, what's important to know, and what you've seen play out through some of the CDC instruction, is we will never again, although people should never say never, but we will never again be in a situation that many people found themselves in at the beginning of 2020. Now there are effective mitigation measures that are in place that includes extensive testing, and that'll continue even with vaccinated crew and passengers, to have prearranged agreements in place with local authorities, with healthcare providers, and with enhanced medical capabilities on board these ships. So all of these considerations have been factored into the protocols that are in place. And again, working in partnership with the authorities and the destinations, we have a high degree of confidence that every case that every incident that might occur will be dealt with immediately, professionally, and in concert with local authorities. So we feel pretty good about the measures that are in place to avoid just something like that.
You mentioned testing. Right now, there are many countries I can't go to unless I show them a negative test within 72 or maybe 96 hours prior to going. I can't come back to the United States without showing a negative test within 72 hours prior to get on the plane to come back. So I'm assuming that every one of the ships that's a member of CLIA has got an extensive onboard testing program so that the passengers can go offshore when they go ashore for their shore excursions, and most importantly, they can get back home.
Right. So cruise lines that are members of Cruise Lines International Association do have in place a member policy that guides their execution of health and safety measures, and testing factors in prominently. In fact, Peter, you might remember, I think way back last October, we were the first industry to declare that we would have 100% testing of passengers and crew, and that remains in place now. And what we're seeing all over the world is just how quickly advancements in testing are happening. And so you can expect that over the next weeks and months, that like other industries, the cruise industry will be adopting some of these new testing protocols that have proven effective, that will be incredibly useful, particularly on those cruises that are open for all, because again, we are looking for an experience that supports multi-generations and children. And so again, testing is a very important part of that.
So what you're saying is no matter what ship I go on, there are testing facilities on board and I will be tested.
No matter what, if you go on a CLIA Cruise Line member, you can expect that lots of testing will be involved. What you can also expect is that there is a terrific customer experience behind it. And so reducing the burden as much as possible is foremost in many cruise operators' minds, so that it's as painless as possible, so that you can get to the ship and you can get off the ship and you can know that the risk has been mitigated to the greatest extent, and the incidences that happen on ships is far lower than anything you see on land.
And you promised me gentle pokes up my nose?
Well, Peter, it depends on how many friends you have in the cruise industry. I'm kidding. I think that, what cruise, you know this better than anybody else, what cruise lines are well known for is service, and they'll go to great lengths to provide for people, for the crew, for their passengers, and for the destinations they visit. So if they can make for an extraordinary experience on any step of this along the way, including testing, you can guarantee they will.
So what you're saying, it's caviar and PCR.
That's a good one. Yes, I think we'll have to incorporate that into some of our digital media.
Thanks again for joining us. And obviously a story we're going to stay on top of in the days and weeks ahead, probably even in the hours ahead. Kelly, thanks again.
Thanks, Peter.